Oh yeah, no, it doesn't get any weirder than that. Alright, we should start airing. Okay. Alright. Oh, people may have heard me there. Right, let's see if your audio is good. We are definitely streaming now, so could you say something quick, Luke?
Hello world, this is Luke Bender from Etra Games, and I'm gonna wave my arms around for no reason.
Let's see if it works. We have to wait for the chat.
Yeah. I see my arm waving on the other screen, so
Sounds good? Oh, fantastic. Oh, it's like one of the first times this has ever happened.
it's
Um,
because I'm here.
Question for chat room. Oh no. Oh, Rob's asking questions towards the chat as well this time.
Oh boy, that's gonna be scary.
Okay. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Indie Dev Chat, a live streamed weekly podcast where I talk to fellow developers, content creators, stuff like that, all about game development and all those lovely, lovely things. And today I'm with Luke from Etra Games. Hello.
Ooh.
Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about, well, I guess we'll see how far we get, but the main discussion is probably going to be about non-gamers. And yeah, so Luke, take it away. For those of us who do not know you, could you quickly tell us about what you do and who you are?
Of course, my name is Luke Bender. I go by Etra on my channel. And what I've been working on for the past 2 years have been working on creating mods and specific custom-made programs, as you can probably see in the upper boundary here, to teach non-gamers how to play certain video games. So like even on that border, you'll see the faded outness of certain UI elements, which telling them to walk forward, backwards, just introducing them to those concepts step by step, and then putting them into games like Portal, Journey, and Deltarune, and then sharing those test results online.
Awesome. So, my first question really, I was watching through your latest video, and I was wondering, when did you start exploring the philosophy of non-gamers? Like, when do you reckon was like the first time you sort of started doing it?
Philosophy scared me. It was a big scary word there for a second. But more the idea of like, when did I first get interested in this idea and
Mm.
started to pursue it? I would have to say that when I was younger, I used to always have my older sister and my mom who I wanted to introduce to video games with, and I wanted them to play the Legend of Zelda series over and over and over again, and it failed over and over and over again. I'll touch upon this in my most recent video, but I actually watched a video by Extra Credits all about game literacy and why it's hard to learn how to play, and that is one of the few videos on this topic out there on YouTube. I got introduced to the concept that basically video games, you have a vocabulary like pressing multiple buttons at once and moving around in a 3D space that you pick up over time. And they kind of brought the problem to the table that, hey, we have no phonics books style video games. And I kind of just decided to make one because I wanted my family to play the games I create eventually. So I kind of switched the direction of my channel from more game analysis content to all about this how your parents can play and teaching non-gamers stuff.
Mhm.
And with the help of my audience, I've got to where we are today with a few pretty cool programs and even more announcements soon. So stay
Awesome.
tuned for that.
So, um, honestly, I find it quite interesting when I hear like the people trying to really improve accessibility for everyone. Oftentimes you hear stories about like disabilities and people making games that are accessible for people that are disabled and stuff, or handicapped, or wherever you're from. And I really think it's really interesting that you're going in another direction rather than what is the norm, so to speak. you know
Yeah, funny you mentioned game accessibility because this is a point I like to push on my college applications is like there is game accessibility where like if you're colorblind, they change the colors so it makes it easier for you to see. And we have had a lot of progress in that direction, but those people need to have learned how to play video games in the first place. With this, I'm kind of focusing on let's get them to learn video games in the first place. And I guess that is accessibility, but if we want to directly compare like reading in video games, which I do a bunch on my channel, we usually do have the term where you become literate through school, through reading all sorts of different phonics books, and eventually getting to the point where you can read anything. And then if we talk about accessibility and reading, that would be still stated as a separate category. So that problem where we've kind of got accessibility and literacy divided, even though literacy is needed for accessibility, seems to be in just about every one of these art forms.
Right. Yeah. Well, here we go. We've got a first question from Rob.
Ooh,
Uh,
let's see here.
what's the greatest hurdle for someone learning a 3D game?
Okay, so I would say that's a difficult question for me to answer because I can't specifically I don't have a lot of test subjects for these. So I call them my test subjects.
Test subjects.
Probably shouldn't. Everyone says I'm the GLaDOS of game development. Doesn't help that I did an episode on Portal.
Yeah, I was about to say.
But what I was gonna say is before even all of this, I know the biggest hurdles I've seen complained about in the comments was always the camera in 3D games and just physically orienting themselves. And the reason I actually started this, I probably didn't answer your question good enough the first time met. But the reason I'm like, oh, I can do this phonics book style game thing is because I realized that a lot of people could play Mario Kart, but they couldn't go then play something like Zelda. And then I noticed that Mario Kart has that locked 3D access.
Yeah.
And you only looked left and right. There was no up and down. So I decided to use that as part of the teaching method in having them move around a 3D space. Camera's got to be a big thing. So introducing it one axis at a time is huge. But a second big thing is pressing two buttons on a controller at once is alien to people. It's, I guess, on your smartphones, you're only tapping one button at a time or scrolling. Maybe you're pinching on occasion. But even on keyboard, when you're typing out a document, if you press multiple buttons on your keyboard at once, you screw up your document.
Yeah.
So, it's like people have a tendency to not do that. And I think those are the two biggest things in just the actual orienting around. But there are so many smaller things that are just untaught that pile on top of that, which gets a bit more frustrating. But that's for getting into it. For actual games that are out there, the biggest hurdle is not that it's once they learn this, they're expected to be very, very competent at these skills. So a lot of people have asked, why am I starting with 3D games? If the camera's such a big issue, like I've said, why am I not starting with Mario? Okay, well, the issue is in a game like Shovel Knight, there's a gap right near the first opening section, and you gotta just jump over the gap. And if you miss that singular gap, you've got to restart the entire level. To you or me, that's absolutely nothing. But for someone who this is their 10th jump they've ever performed. If they mess that up, they're severely punished. So the standard difficulty for games has been increasing and increasing the longer
Yeah.
a certain genre is around. So for platformers, I'd say that's the highest. But
Mhm.
for 3D games like even BioShock or Call of Duties and so on, those genres haven't been around as long, so that like general base difficulty that it starts out as isn't as much to practice before you can be
Yeah.
competent at that skill.
Mm.
Whereas something like a platformer, you're expected to have 25 years of experience on this skill before you do that. So you have your initial things, but then this general difficulty, I say, is kind of the biggest to playing any video game not built for non-gamers, the biggest obstacle currently.
Right, right. That's cool. Honestly, my mind is getting like exploded. This is a really interesting topic. I really like it. Um.
You
Oh.
can go ahead, Matt, but I just wanted to mirror this question on you at one point in the interview about like what have your experiences been with non-gamers?
Right.
I got jealous when I saw a tweet of your mom playing Millions of Minions. And I'm like, dang, that's what I want. That's what I want. I want to
Yeah.
make games. I want my whole family to understand them at least.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your side of that when you have the chance.
Yeah. I'll talk about it now. I actually have quite an interesting like story in terms of it. So in November, that's been 2019, 20. I don't know when it was. I made a game for my dad's birthday, and obviously, when you're making a game for a dad, it can't be too difficult. My dad, he plays games every so often, um, and all it was you literally were stuck in one position, and you aimed the camera and shot at the oncoming ducks. It wasn't too complex, but it seemed to be something that my dad could play. And then uh, when we came to like my parents were really proud of it, and I was like, okay, thanks. Like it's hard not to like be like, oh. Um, and then we went to my grandparents' house, and we had the whole family there. We had my granddad, you know, my nan, and my disabled aunt as well, who's also a non-gamer at the same time. And one thing that I found really interesting with this was that players, or players in terms of them, they were able to, you know, use the mouse and click. It seemed to be very. It didn't seem to be too like complex for them because again as you said, you're not having to press two buttons. You have to there's a motion and there's a click, but that's about it. And I think that is definitely an interesting like insight that is always stuck in my mind. Like I still remember, like, it really warmed my heart seeing my when I saw my disabled aunt who can only use one of her hands, like she was able to point and click and shoot. I was like, wow, it is really really fascinating. And she doesn't play games either, so it's crazy. That's my experience anyway.
Got it. I would have to say, specifically for that game, I feel like that is a skill that they've already practiced a
Yeah.
bunch if they've used a computer, and then just you bringing that right into your game seems fantastic. Like VR, I have so many props just sitting on my desk, ready for discussion. But VR right now is so easy to learn because it is just those hand motions you
Yeah.
do. You don't have to learn that button does this thing. It's just you do that thing
Mm.
and it works. And on top of that, as I mentioned with the genres and platformers expecting you to have all this knowledge and all this skill because they've been going for 30 years, VR is brand new, but it also means it's not super interesting because it hasn't gotten too complex yet.
Mm.
So what I was gonna say, I'm still curious, what led from that experience onto your mom playing millions of minions? I am
Right.
genuinely jealous, Matt. I need an answer, and I need it before the end of this interview. I'm gonna
Hmm.
explode.
Well, you see, my parents, like, I tend to sort of push it on them to try my game, whatever I'm making. Um, but yeah, my parents found that one of the things that I found when we were developing Worms Minions was that the game is not easy. That's something that became very apparent. And I asked my mum, could you do you want to give a try to the game? Because I think I'm not sure where that picture was. It's either at the convention or it was here. I don't know. But anyway, like we I sort of have this sort of relationship with my parents where they're like my play testers to see like how easy I can make the game and how accessible I can make it. It is really insightful, being able to use this data. There's something that I always see is that like there's a lot of tips that I saw quite early on in my game development journey. Was that you should get the oldest people or the least experienced people to play your game to see how difficult it is for them and see like because they're gonna notice things that like experienced players wouldn't. Like for example, uh, like moving and shooting. Obviously, that's a completely like what is that sort of what does that even mean? Um, and I sort of found that like the my parents were they could do one. So I've got a control right here. They could do one.
Oh, Bane.
They could do one like thing at once. So they could like they could move, and then they could shoot afterwards, but they couldn't do them at the same time as you say. Um, but yeah, I mean I don't really know. Like I guess my mom was just probably forced her to play it.
All right.
And actually, it may have been on my mobile phone that she was playing it on because we ported it to Android.
That
Yeah,
was it. I remember.
yeah, and I came downstairs and I saw both of my parents were playing my game, and I'll tell you, it's a crazy sight when you see your parents just like they're just here like playing whatever they are. I'm like what? That's cool. But yeah, the I think one thing I noticed that was that on mobile, my parents were a lot more adept with it. They knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing. And I'm not sure if that's because there was because the buttons on the screen are technically tooltips if you think about it. They're like like the game had like a shoot button and I can't remember really, but it had a shoot and a melee button. It had two buttons and as well as like moving around. So I wonder if being able to visually see like the controls that you have to do like helps them to remind them, right? Obviously that's a bit different in like a 3D space though, because the game, Millions of Minions is a 2D game. It's not made on a 3D plane, so maybe if you added that extra layer, it would be a completely different story. But yeah, it is really really interesting to see because I think it's something that a lot of developers don't really notice. Like if you don't have like older people at home, then chances are they're not going to really play your game, like unless you maybe ask them. It's a lot easier for me, I literally just walk out of the room, and then turn left, and then there I am. I'm with my parents, and I can ask them whatever. And actually, the other day, I'm currently developing a new game, and I got my both of my parents to play it. My mom was like, I don't know what I'm doing. What is the goal, and everything like that. but my dad, like, he wasn't that good at the game. Like, definitely aiming. I think aiming is the big thing. Like, that's something that I always find when my parents are playing games. Like, they're aiming. They can't, like, look left and right, you know. Um, and and yet he was still really enjoying himself. And I think that is a key takeaway from that, is that, like, even if the game, like, even if the game's really difficult or whatever, if I feel like as long as, like, older people or non-gamers in general can play that game and enjoy it, I think that's more important than being able to actually play the game. Like, because I think it's like, you know, it's silly to assume that, well, not necessarily silly, but, like, you know, they're not going to be able to play as experienced players. And, like, for us, like, when we're playing, being bad at a game is, like, um, what's the word? Like, less rewarding, right? We don't get any reward. If we fail at a game, we feel like we failed. Whereas when non-gamers are playing it, they still haven't got, they don't really care, because they know already that they're gonna, you know, they're gonna be, like, they're gonna probably fail anyway. So I wonder if that plays a part in it. And for some reason, Armin has just Armin has just timed Armin has just timed out Rob. Armin, why? Okay.
Oh no.
So a question from Casual Dutchman.
Yeah, and I might go back to some of the things you mentioned.
Oh, actually, you know what? Go on if you want. You might as well.
Okay, well, first of all, I do want to say that having the buttons physically on screen idea, I have never thought of that, and that's why I do want to talk to everybody I can about this topic, especially developers. I never thought of having the buttons where you physically see their labels there, would be helpful, and I'm certain it would be. What I always do is, I don't have any here, but I always put stickers on the controller to mark these are the important buttons and this is what they do. And I do that because instead of scanning through 10 buttons and seeing what to press, they only scan through 2 buttons and see what to press. And that gets them more in the game.
Yeah.
And if their eyes are entirely on the screen, that could be really helpful. And you also mentioned about, like, accounting for non-gamers and accounting for them having fun, which I don't see a lot of people doing, which I think is an absolute shame, tragedy, whatever, because if you look at any other art form, you look at books, I look around for props already, because they've just been magically appearing this entire interview. I don't have any movies to grab, it seems. But books are advertised for all ages, all genders. Movies are advertised to all ages, all genders. Music, same way. Video games used to be the same way before the Atari crash. I have a whole video about that. But if we decided to account for wider demographics in both age and gender, I feel like we could have a huge boom in all sorts of different types of video games, as well as just expand the industry in general. So it's completely a positive thing to be accounting for people who don't play games. The only negative is if you make it easier, then it's not as challenging for your normal players. So there is that balance there, but I feel like you can make a game more accessible without making it super easy either, with different difficulty systems, a non-gamer mode for an extra tutorial, and so on. But I'll get to more of those ideas on my channel. And then the final thing you mentioned about just a game being physically fun to play, even if you don't fully understand it. There are a lot of parallels between what we see in the huge gaming realm, as in crazy complicated things, to non-gamers that they have to learn, to our overall gaming landscape, to, and I'm going to turn this question on you, have you ever played a traditional 2D fighting game, Matt?
Probably when I was like 4.
Okay, so I have never approached the series. I'm doing a big project on this, in the background, uh, and anyway, we'll be looking more into that. But they kind of have the same problem that we have for games in general, where they need to make it where before people learn their complicated systems, it just has to be fun to play before you even know what the heck is going on.
Mm.
So, like you just mentioned with your game, that your dad found it fun to play, fighting game builders, developers, that's the word we use in the game industry, um, they just make button mashing fun, usually,
Right,
before you
yeah.
understand what's going on. And then we also have a full group of people trying to make phonics book style video games for phonics game for fighting games, and specifically that genre. There's a ton of parallels there, um, which I think we can learn from in the game community in general. If we look at fighting games and see how are they introducing normal gamers to their subgenre, and use those teaching styles to look at how do we get non-gamers into our general platformers, first-person shooters, main genres of games, and then maybe that subgenre as well one day.
Right, right.
Um, I think there's a lot to learn there, and what you said just really caught my interest on that specific mashing buttons still needs to be enjoyable, and it's like, yes, now if we can incorporate that to the wider gaming sphere and not just fighting games, that'd be cool.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think another thing that just crossed my mind was that, like, again, on the topic of, like, what they find fun and what we find fun, um, I think a key takeaway is that, like, when I was playing, or when my dad was playing the game, I think one big thing was that the game's multiplayer, right? So I wonder if the reason he was like enjoying it was because I was there with him. Like, I don't know if that was possibly a big thing, but I feel like that probably contributed to it.
I want to test that so bad because I have two projects. One I had to end up going with, one I'll end up going with in the future. But like I mentioned platformers, I had in my mind I want to test like Shovel Knight has a two-player mode, Sonic Mania has a two-player mode. I feel like partnering someone with a gamer and going through a co-op adventure would be like one of the best ways to teach a non-gamer certain skills
Mm.
because they'll get to see what the proper behavior to play is and
Yeah.
imitate that, as well as having that social aspect which instantly gives humans dopamine rush. um and so combining those, I think, would be a fantastic way to learn. The only problem is you also don't want them to feel like they're player two, or dragging people behind. So,
Yeah.
Sonic Mania, I know everyone complains about like the Tails mode is garbage, whatever. Tails, if Sonic Mania didn't have that super high difficulty bar to start out with, like a Tails like assist character where you're still able to do all the actions normally, but you're not able to control the movement of the screen. You're just able to stay on the screen the player one has basically picked out. You can help in fights, you can show them how to play properly, you can defend them, attack for them, and then you can also adjust your own skill to make sure the game isn't too boring or frustrating for them. And there's a lot that I really think can be done with
Yeah.
multiplayer when
Mm.
it comes to teaching games.
Oh yeah,
There's
I
this
definitely think so.
specific term about like watching people to learn, and I feel like that is something that should really be
Mm.
tested.
I think
Anyway, go on.
I think a really good game for that would probably be Minecraft. I think like it can teach a lot of the core mechanics of like controls and stuff. Um, and what's the point? Like uh, Minecraft can be played on anything as well. And I think that is a big point too. It's not constricted to just like a mouse and keyboard. It's not constricted to just a gamepad. You know, you have literally so like every possible like controller that you ever want, really. So I think that is definitely a big thing for that, and with the added functionality of multiplayer being there and being able to go at your own pace, you know, it definitely gives a lot of good ideas for me. I mean, like my dad, me and him, like when we were young, or when I was younger, not when, well, I get, but when I was younger, you know, we would play Minecraft together, and that was like, even though he was never really good, he like he always felt like I felt like he was getting better and better as we progressed because his aiming was definitely improving. You could see that he wasn't, you know, mining a grass block rather than like, you know, a log or whatever. You know, there's a lot of key parts of Minecraft that I think you can use.
On the topic of Minecraft specifically, I so want to make a how your parents can play Minecraft. Just imagine the views. Um,
Oh yeah,
uh, it seemed perfect. The only issue is like deal with the camera thing in a tutorial that I've been working on. Uh, and they know how to play an FPS game, but the problem is when you throw a gamer in Minecraft, not even a non-gamer here, it tells them nothing. It has no superset tutorial. It has some tutorial worlds, but then the speed that knowledge is introduced to players. So you press E to open up your crafting inventory. What's a crafting inventory? What are materials? What are this? And then boom, by the time you figure out that the sun is already down and monsters start attacking you. What are monsters? What is health? What is damage? And that just seems to be a mix
yeah,
that goes so overwhelming it explodes a player. I haven't tested it. Frankly, anything can be learned if they're dedicated enough to learn it.
yeah. Well,
And
I
I
think
know
also. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Go. You go first. Sorry.
Okay, Rasputin, my friendly, I don't know what to say. The other person doing videos on this topic, he had his wife play through Minecraft, but he did so by first introducing her to the creative mode, and she actually had a great time on like more peaceful difficulties where monsters weren't overwhelming. She liked building things, but never really got seriously into the crafting side of things.
Yeah.
And what I don't want to have happen is I like the games being enjoyable, but I don't want them to say, "Okay, this is neat," and then leave gaming forever. That's that's the other
That's a good
thing
point.
I don't want to see because I hear a lot of those stories where like parents tried this game, they kind of got 20% of it. They enjoyed that 20% of it, but then never touched games again because even that 20% was overwhelming. I do want that episode one day. I really, really do want to how your parents can play Minecraft, and I think it has a ton of potential for learning, a ton of potential for that multiplayer following thing I mentioned. Um, it's just learning those systems to not have everything so overwhelming right out the gate. If there was like a simpler Minecraft, that could be perfect.
Mm.
Uh, Maybe a mod which removes things instead of adds things, and then you go from that into
Well,
Minecraft 2.
I think I mean I don't know how the access is for it. I'm not sure if it's just like schools and stuff, but the whole Minecraft Education Edition, I think like that. I mean that's got to mean that like you know it's good for teaching you know people how to play games and a lot of other things. You know it's obviously made for you know younger audiences, but I think it can still be applied in some regards. But yeah.
And on that note, I have 10,000 tangents I could always go on. But what I want to have happen, and I'd love to maybe benefit from this one day, is you mentioned we have Minecraft Education Edition. I hate to bring this topic up, but they had training simulations for school incidents, we'll say. In US, they had virtual training incidents where uh, you had teachers play as teachers escorting their students out of a building, out of an American building. So I think you catch my drift. But they had trouble playing the game. They had trouble physically playing the game. So it took a while, but first reading literacy was needed for you to get a job. Then now film literacy, which we all kind of quickly got without needing to study. Some people have had to do that. Um, has been needed to get a job, and there's so much video tutorials you have to watch in any job today. Now I'm wondering when video game literacy will become a requirement for you to get a job one day, or video game literacy is ever taught in a classroom so you can then use teaching tools and practice tools.
That'd be
And
so cool.
I feel like the more we don't focus on this non-gamer topic, where we just focus on video games are for people who grew up with them,
Yeah.
if we focus on that too much, we're never gonna reach the point where we can use video games for documentaries. We can use them for just anything a book could do, but almost better. Like,
Yeah.
we won't reach that if we just focus on only gamers gaming game time. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would. I think one day it's definitely gonna become like a one of the classes that is taught in one of the like the time you're in school. But when that is, I think it's really up to like influencers like yourself really, because you're gonna be able to show that it is possible to you know draw things from gaming other than just for enjoyment and stuff. There's a lot of things you can do from it, and I think it's definitely a really interesting topic where learning through video games could possibly, especially I think now that we've had like the whole COVID pandemic and stuff, and like the whole online schooling, I think now would have been such a perfect time to be able to teach through video games. Could you imagine the engagement that all the students would have? Like, it would be crazy amounts than what it currently is. And I think that if we had done that before, we would have had really good education over the course of the pandemic, I'd say. Yeah.
And it is possible. Like, you've got Fortnite out here where you can have yourself playing and you also have your webcam displaying on the screen. So we've got the technology to make Zoom rooms physical virtual locations, or even like physical models and things the whole class
Yeah.
can interact with. The technology is out there. It's just we got to get over the fact that video games have a bad name. Probably, in my opinion, it's all conspiracy by film producers and what was I gonna say, news media, which we're basically going to replace them one day. Um, and what was I gonna say? I forget. I completely forgot my tangent.
You're fine, man. No, but honestly, I think it's just, it's so fascinating thinking that like, you know, we're one of, like, there's not actually that many gamers as we really think. Like, when you're a gamer, you think like everyone can game, right? Whereas that's not the case at all. Like, you give your mum or your dad like a games controller, like a new one, like one that's made now, chances are they're not gonna know what on earth they're supposed to be doing. They'll be like, "What is that?" And like every time, actually, that is another thing. Every time my dad is playing on an Xbox controller, the one thing he always says is, "God, I hate how many buttons there are," or there's too many buttons, or "there's so many buttons." And my dad then goes on a tangent about how great like it was when it was only one button or whatever. But it is definitely really fascinating. I could go on for so long with this. This is such a it's such a cool topic. I love it. Um, but yeah, I think that kind of links into never mind. I was going to ask a question, but I can't remember where the question was. I think was it
Are you saying about game jams, honest feedback? We can focus on non-gamers if you want, but it's
Oh, I think we could focus on gamers to be honest.
yeah.
Jonas had a question. What do you think about automatic difficulty adjustments in video games?
Ooh, okay. Darn. Okay, I'll just have to get specific here. I've been working with this one person, this doctoral student in Northeastern University, gonna have a whole video about it, making a fighting game for non-gamers. And this was what we literally just talked about, was having an adapting difficulty. We spent a 2-hour mini debate on, okay, should this have adaptive difficulty or not? And, the answer is a bit messy. It's a really case by case situation. If it has adaptive difficulty, the player should know about it and choose it. That's my stance. I feel like we haven't even reached a common stance on adaptive difficulty in video games for gamers. Like the common Mark Brown's video about the Resident Evil adaptive difficulty. That kind of spread the news like wildfire that a lot of people felt cheapened out by Resident Evil's difficulty settings, which you couldn't adjust on your own. And I feel like the biggest issue, especially in fighting games, is if we have a mom who's proud that she beat this game, and then we have that son who's proud that he beat this game, and then suddenly the mom learns the game was 10 times less difficult for her, that's gonna be a feeling that may not make her return to video games even ever.
Mm-hmm.
So what we kind of ended up deciding with was working with basically they set their own difficulty but rewarding them for challenging themselves. No matter what difficulty they are, we took quite a bit of inspiration from Smash Bros. If you've you said you haven't played traditional fighting games, but Smash Bros, yes.
I played that like 10 years ago, but...
Okay. Well, in the newer titles, they have, for the solo mode, they have this slider where if you set the difficulty to 0, you get, like, no rewards. Where if you set the difficulty higher, you have to risk some of your current rewards for a chance at getting higher rewards. So it keeps it tense, and you get to set your own difficulty there. We're kind of working through a system that says, if this is too difficult for you, go back, practice previous levels at a higher difficulty, and then come back here. And then through that all, we plan to be keeping track of the player's data, and then that difficulty slider I talked about, tell them where we think it should be, and they can go with that or not.
Yeah.
We're hoping that they just mash A through it, know they've had an experience with difficulty and like looped through our system to the point where it's like, okay, you can trust this, and then they go with it, and then that difficulty suits them, is good for them, and pushes them to challenge themselves.
Gotcha.
So adaptive difficulty, I guess that's a bit way too specific of an example, but I'd say in general for adaptive difficulty in like story-based games, I would be still against it. I would say think harder. Think of a system where players can challenge themselves at any skill level.
I would agree with that.
And be rewarded for challenging themselves, and be aware of that.
Yeah.
I am personally not a fan of adaptive difficulty when it's forced on a player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also adaptive difficulty, as Rob just said in the chat, like as developers, adaptive difficulty is really hard to get it right. Like you've really gotta, like even if you get it right, you're not gonna appeal to maybe the non-gamers, and I think a really like the difficulty select. Like when I'm going through, like I like to play a lot of single player games, and I think the difficulty selects that say just like easy, normal, hard. Okay.
What does it mean?
Yeah, what
You
does it
haven't
mean?
played the game.
But then, what I really like is when I'm playing a game and it has like maybe 5 difficulties, which goes over quite a lot of people, and as you highlight it, it tells you what it means, and I think that is another thing. So if you don't go for a slider sort of option, like making sure that the people know what they're choosing is also just as important. Like imagine like you go for it gives you a bunch of difficulty options like very easy, normal, hard, expert, and you're like, well, is hard like what does hard do, And then you could hover over it and it says like more enemies than more, whatever it would be, but making sure that it is listed. I think like a bullet point list, as like simple as it sounds, I think even just that would be really like helpful for everyone really. Like, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think for me, like when I'm playing a game and I'm choosing a difficulty, I get like the feeling that I want to challenge myself. Like I'll think of, okay, I'll probably play normal, and then I'm like, actually, I'll go up a difficulty just to challenge myself. And that, as you said before, it's very important that the player wants to challenge themselves and like they know where they want to challenge themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes again, right? What you said about it, the player can't really choose their own difficulty if they don't know what the difficulty is. So, even one phrase I've loved to see in games is, "This is the developer's intended difficulty," and then that goes into a whole debate of should there be easy modes? Should Dark Souls have an easy mode for game journalists? And even though I've said all of this stuff so far, I would say no. I feel like Dark Souls should be where it's at. I feel like we are in a bit of a weird spot here. I have books for my communication class, these 40 short stories, and this one called The Virgin Suicides, and some really hard to read, just physically harder to read, harder to break down, comprehend books. What we don't need is, we don't need the easier to comprehend, medium to comprehend, hard to comprehend version of this book.
Right.
What we have instead is, we need not just this book to be the standard. We need Harry Potter in the middle and phonics books at the end here. We need this range.
Yeah.
Right now, we kind of are working with, okay, hard, medium, easy. We're trying to make do with what little we have and make that work for a wide range of people. But I want games to be at a point where everyone kind of just, like, you're not expected to read this book, as in for a short story, that's you're not expected to read Shakespeare when you've only read for 1 year. It seems like we already have a culture where if you play video games, you should be able to pick up any video game.
Yeah.
And that's not what we have with reading right now. So I feel like we need to have, again, a range of how easy or difficult something is to play or comprehend. And in reading, that range isn't a bad thing. Like,
Yeah.
you can really enjoy, really be a fan of a book which doesn't take your brain 10,000 years to comprehend, or even a show where, like, it's a bit more simple and laid out in an easier to understand way. It's not like Attack on Titan or The Matrix where you have to rewatch and re-examine that.
Yeah.
You have those easy to understand, medium, and more difficult films, books, movies, and music. So I feel like we should have that range in video games. We're developing that range, but then we're also used to, we need to make this work for as many players as possible. We're trying to build phonics books out of War and Peace, and that's not working.
Yeah.
We need phonics books, Harry Potter, and War and Peace.
Yeah.
All of those are good on their own. And I like the idea of having some simpler to understand things. And for Portal and my How Your Parents Can Play Portal video, I wanted to make Portal for non-gamers, but in doing so, I cut the companion cube level. The companion cube level. What is Portal without the companion cube level? I'm hurting the artistic experience for another sake of the player, and it changes the experience. So instead of changing these experiences, we should say it's okay to have simpler games, and we can still have them be enjoyable.
Yeah.
So
I think that a key thing as a developer is when you're making a game is you have your own idea of like what you want the game to be, right? It's the whole thing of like making sure you want to play that game. You know, that you got to make sure that you want to play the game that you're making, otherwise the game's not going to go very far. And a big thing here is that the difficulty is when you come to the difficulty discussion, you talk about what players can play it. And for us, when we've been doing our game design document for our new game, when we were going through it, you know, we wanted the game to be accessible by a lot of players, but with the exception of like, you know, like everyone can play in some way, but like we want to make it so that, you know, if you fail, it's not necessarily like you've like absolutely failed everything. You know, the main like focus of the game is to have fun with your friends, and you know, like I feel like you just have to know what the difficulty is that you want to have for the game when you're making it. Like, you know, I think giving it a broad range of difficulties also causes a lot of confusion at the same time, because if you have like an easy mode, a normal mode, and a hard mode, let's say, what defines hard mode and how is it different from that easy mode? You know, like it could be like, you know, you could just make it so there's a little less enemies, but what does that actually do? Like, you know, that all that's going to do is maybe take away a couple of the, you know, the targets that players have to kill, but does that necessarily decrease the difficulty? Not really. It can, but really in terms of like playing it, like it's not going to be like, it's not going to change the difficulty of actually controlling the character, you know, playing with it and stuff like that. And I think that's a problem that non-gamers will probably be facing when they're presented with a difficulty screen. That's what I'm thinking anyway.
And again, I think my idea is far out, but just getting rid of difficulty screens in general.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Could alleviate that problem. Could also shut out modes of play. And then the other point to have
isn't that also in a way, in some way, it's a good thing that we're, how do I say it? Like, as you said earlier, making a range of games, right, with varying difficulties, where their difficulty is set, can help players to be introduced into the bigger games. If you have, like, as you said earlier, phonics books, then maybe you read like Harry Potter and then Shakespeare, whatever it is. I mean, I don't know why you'd go that route, but you know, if you did, let's say,
why you would read Shakespeare in general.
Yeah, that too. But the point is that I think that if you preface it as a developer, like right at the start, when people are about to buy the game, you know, they go through the store page, you say, you know, this game is intended for whoever it is, like people with a medium amount of experience. That can help non-gamers get introduced into gaming. You know, let's say they start off with, I mean, I don't know what easy games there are. Give me an example that's an easy game.
There you go. Boom. Well, I would say Journey, Portal, those are two of them. They're
Yeah.
still somewhat difficult, or like Abzu, that one's one. Any walking simulator is easy to play. I hate that term, but that's a great example of games that are fine with their difficulty. They can still be themselves, they can still be good games without being drastically difficult. Like
Yeah.
the Return of Edith, the something of Edith Finch. Edith Finch is a good game. Um, it's great, and I've considered it, but then it jumps between like six different genre gameplay styles, which you're supposed to know before jumping into
Right. Right.
and I can't teach non-gamers in a program six different gameplay styles and then only use them for 5 minutes in the section of the game. So that can still have a lower difficulty, but it's an easy game. There's your example.
Yeah. So then, I think difficulty needs to be like, how do I say it? I feel like it needs to be taken as seriously as target audiences in marketing. When you're marketing your game, you have a target audience that your marketing is supposed to be targeting, or that is literally the worst explanation of target audience. That is literally what it is. But anyway, the whole point of it is that you've got people in mind that you want to play your game. Now you've got to make sure you associate these people with the difficulty that they're going to be playing, and making it known to them that this game, like let's say, I don't know, Dark Souls, right? You're not going to introduce Dark Souls to a first-time player of any game ever. Like that's going to go awfully. And making sure that you market it so that you say this is for experienced players only. Now, whilst that does exclude people, it's creating that range that you said earlier, which I think is more important than the exclusion process. Like the whole exclusion thing is that like now, how many games are made a year? Like it's probably like 30,000, 40,000 now, maybe something like that. If that amount of games are being made, you know, there's a huge range, and if they followed the same format across the board, like it could really help to introduce players, and they know exactly how they're supposed to be like playing the games, and what order they're supposed to be playing it in. Because as a non-gamer, let's say you had no assistance whatsoever, it's going to be terrifying. You're going to be like, where do I start? Let's say you thought Minecraft was easy, as you said earlier. There's so many things in it, and immediately you could be turned off of the game. You could be like, right, no, I'm not playing games ever again. And I think having this norm, or like having, how like age ratings work, like
Yeah, I was just gonna say
yeah,
the Peggy age
I
ratings, like you
think
could do that.
I think it should be set into like tiers, like I don't know, like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, maybe tier 5, something like that. And the when you're getting your age rating and stuff like that, maybe you get QA testers from varying like target audiences to play your game, and they're like, okay, this is too difficult. They maybe they, I don't know, do a survey or something like a questionnaire, stuff like that. Put a tier on the game case. Like if you're buying a PS4 game, or well, I guess it's not PS4 anymore, but if you see like 18 plus, that just means that the game is for adults. That doesn't. What's that gonna help? If you had a tier, I think that would help so much with so many people.
And before we end here, I do want to say we've got two dimensions here to keep track of. We have our brain knowledge here of what is a crafting system, what are materials, what are all these things, this big list of info you need to know. And then there's actual player skill of physical button inputs. So you've kind of got to even rank two stickers on this of how much do you need to know before going into this game, And then how difficult is it to physically play? Like for Edith Finch, I'd say it's a very easy game to play, but the knowledge you need when it swaps between 6 genres of game is much larger than a 2 rating.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But
thank you for the wonderful ideas and perspective.
yeah, well, you see, there's so many. Okay, it just streams out. No, but honestly, I think that just having some general guideline, even if it wasn't necessarily like the whole tier thing that I said, like even if it was just some guideline for people to follow, that would be so greatly helpful. Like, I think honestly, like a really good way of going about it until things change, and chances are right, sadly, things probably won't really change in this department, you know, like maybe eventually.
Not for a while.
Yeah, exactly. Not for a while. And I think for now, like maybe coming up with some sort of like you know how like you have IGN and GameSpot and all that, you have all the review sites. Having a similar thing to that, or like you know like Metacritic, for example.
You're spoiling all my
But
projects.
okay, well, you know, I'm just saying a
Gamers for
database,
non-gamers.
a database where people know the difficulty of the game they're playing. Boom.
Mhm.
Because I think, you know, I think that would help so many people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. I think you gotta rename this video non-gamers and difficulty.
Yeah, that's what
Uh,
I'm probably gonna talk about. But yeah, thank you so much for partaking in this stream. It's honestly, this has been a really awesome episode. I really liked it.
well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll have you on again in future because I'd love to go on about this topic even more because I think there's infinite things you could talk about with this, and
I'd be down for
you
that.
have opened up my mind. I didn't even like think about half this stuff before. You see, this is why I love the show. Is that like I talk to these people, I talk to all sorts of people, and like each time I talk to someone, like someone new, I'm like, "Wow, I never thought about that." And yeah, so really appreciative of that. You've really, such a cool discussion. It makes me like giddy. um,
Me too.
but yeah, I really hope you enjoyed your time on here. That's the most important thing, right? And yeah, I hope everyone in chat has enjoyed the stream. I think it has been pretty good. I hope. I don't know. maybe people are like you've been blabbering on for all the whole time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been really great. And next week I have Casual Dutchman next week. Or Peter. I don't really know what we're talking about. I kind of forgotten. So that's pretty bad. But you know, tune in for the next one.
About video games, possibly.
No, I don't think so. I think we were talking about movies this time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because indie
Lost
movie
the
chat.
rebranding.
Indie movie chat. Yeah. Oh, that is an awful. That does not roll. But yeah, so tune in for the next week. And yeah, you should see it on the YouTubes soon. It should like come up. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.